Parrot TV, the voice for humanity.
Hi, welcome to the New York Parrot Literary Corner. My name is Dustin Pickering. I am your host, and thank you for joining us today. If you're viewing, please check out some other videos of ours. They're on our channel, Parrot TV, that's on YouTube. Today we have Anthony Gorman, who is a former and flamboyant social and crisis worker. He is now a father and creative expressionist and intuitive healer who enjoys writing and sharing poetry, painting in acrylic, and taking abstract photographs around Ottawa. Anthony's interests include ancient civilizations, esoteric teachings, sound and color healing, and social subversion. Thank you for joining us today, Anthony. I hope you're doing good.
I'm doing pretty well here in Ottawa. How are you doing there?
Doing all right. It's a little
Good.
mild weather out here. So,
Yeah.
getting to your work and to how you, your creative pursuits.
Mhm.
So, in working with, social work, does that, your observations from that when you were involved in that, did it ever factor into your poetry at all or any of your other creative work?
Well, from a young age, I had an interest in working with people and sort of interpersonal dynamic. So I found that getting into social work, I wound up in crisis work and working in addictions and mental health, and had great experience working with a lot of resilient people, but it has a tendency to wear on you as a worker. I guess I should say it had a tendency to wear on me. So following my work as a social worker, that's when I found I got into writing more. And in looking hindsight, I think a lot of it was sort of sorting through some of the vicarious work of having, been alongside people at their, I guess, moments of struggle. So I think that for me, writing and creativity was par and course, because when I went through social work, there was very little emphasis on self-care, seeking out assistance in your own employment for that, because there was, a fair amount of competition still. So a lot of the workers' struggles were fairly hidden. So anyways, long story short, for me, a lot of what I write about is sort of the internal dynamic and different situations between people. I like trying to occupy the role of the different players as well. So my writing isn't always from the perspective of the more ideal, moralistic standpoint. So I guess I've just used it as a way to sort through a lot of that.
Right. So it was more of a point of reference, and so you never really found like the stories you heard from people you worked with that they ever influenced, and you found them their way into your work, into your writing.
I found little pieces here and there, but the way I write tends to be more in fragments. So it wasn't sort of direct representations of the stories, but I would notice sort of like feelings that maybe one of the person would have permeating my own work. So it's kind of like little whispers of different people mixed with my own thoughts, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's where you get into sort of your abstract
Yes.
modes of taking and picking bits of pieces of things,
Right.
and they fact, especially with feeling, because that's very much an expressionist view.
Right.
So my next question is about your blog. You
Mhm.
have a blog. If you'll tell us a little bit about it, and when did you start it, and have you found any success with it, and if so, what kind of success?
Um, I started about 7 years ago, and it was based on a name. I always wanted to have a high school band, and I was going to call it Hands in the Garden, but it never panned out. So I'm like, okay, I'll put a website together. And I wrote a lot of poetry, and I was just trying to think of what's a way to share this with others and gain my confidence. So I started about 7 years ago, and it turns out Hands in the Garden ended up being a good name because of a lot of it's about, the grimy side of life, getting your hands dirty while trying to figure out the answers. So I posted on that, gained a few thousand followers over years. I'm not an overly I don't promote my work a lot, so it was quite a close knit group. I wound up publishing a book out of that, and I've made some good connections through that website. But one of the struggles I've had is I have a lot of struggle with the marketing standpoint and how to do that in a way I feel ethical about. So I haven't done a lot of promotion with my work.
Right. Do you have any plans to sort of, do more promotion in the future, or are you just kind of letting it flow out the way it is right now?
Well, I actually have a manuscript completed that I'm confident enough now and ready to circulate it. And I have a constant, I call it the going manuscript, that I add to on a daily basis and re-edit. And at some point when that's ready, I'll do something with it. Maybe trying to cross some of the mediums, like some abstract photography in with the poetry, working some of the artwork I did 6 years ago as well. So collaborations would be great too. I'm sort of open to seeing where it leads.
So if we have anybody viewing right now who's interested in collaborating, get in touch and talk to you about what they can offer.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about Sink to the Surface. What was your system there of creating that work, and what did you feel accomplished by writing it?
Right. Well, when I started to write initially, it felt like a hobby like anything else, but I began pouring more time into it, and I found I would go through chunks of 6 or 7 hours of writing, and I would enter almost a trance-like state. And that's when I found I was able to sort through a lot of these things. So for me, it was like sink to the surface. It's like to get to where you want to be, you have to go bottom and up. It's the sort of the classic trope, but it was very much par in course, because for me, it was a lot of it is just about unraveling things inside that I'm unaware of that don't seem to come out until I reach that creative space. And that's where I feel it all comes together.
Interesting. So what were some of the things that you found you discovered in writing in that collection?
Some of the things I discovered about myself, or
just in general observations that you may have noted that came out in your writings that you weren't consciously considering.
One of the things I found really difficult is when I started writing, I was in a different mindset. So I wanted to project a certain type of writing. But I found the more I let the process take over, I couldn't really control like the theme, the nature. So for me, it was very unpredictable. And I guess it was more honest than I originally intended it to be. It's sort of like the process drew out what it wanted. So it almost became to a point where I felt like I wasn't controlling what it was I was writing, so it was hard to target it. So I learned a lot about that, about myself, because I guess I got to see fragments I wouldn't have otherwise.
Interesting. So it's very unpredictable and spontaneous. It just flowed. Your work just kind of occurred. You didn't obviously. I mean, as a poet myself, I don't sit down and think this book will be such and such.
Yeah, exactly.
It just happens, and it comes out the way it comes out, and whatever it is, and that's what I stand by, is it being a spontaneous creative process. And it sounds like you also experienced that with Sink to the Surface, and that's an interesting use of paradox, sink to the surface. And so
and just
as far
to
as
that, sorry, just to add to that, it was an initial collection. My writing sort of branched off of that, but another thing that sort of happens is I notice like some of the poems will come out almost in a nursery rhyme simplicity, then others will come out overly wordy. Other ones almost sound like they have a Scottish cadence. Like I say, it's a really unpredictable process, and I don't know why it presents like that. And
right.
Yeah.
So maybe that goes another thing I was gonna ask, but I was gonna save it for later, is like, your interest in esoteric teachings, and maybe that's sort of part of that is trying to understand this process of, who are we as a people, and who are we as writers, and who are we in terms of our nature, and also your interest in ancient civilizations. Have you ever discovered anything in reading or researching in these things that you think apply to the modern world?
Well, the further I go back, it's clear to see certain areas where we kind of missed the boat in terms of how we framed our information going forth. So a lot of my interest stems back to Egyptian mythology especially, and sort of the link between Egyptian mythology also, and how the perceptions of aliens and sort of religious dogma merge in certain places. So I find it interesting to examine that, and also the ancient use of alchemy, and how we've often misinterpreted alchemy as being like a physical change, when alchemy can also include the transmutation of dark within oneself. So it's just, I guess it's the further I go back, the more I encounter some of these wisdoms that I didn't necessarily learn in my limited education system.
Right. So it's about discovery and digging into as you go back to the hands in the garden, digging into those uncomfortable truths, sticking your hands in the dirt and digging in and seeing what you find. And yeah, there's definitely a lot missing in way they teach things and the education system. I wonder what do you think of if people were more interested in the arts and interested in this kind of study? How do you think we could benefit from that?
Well, I grew up in the era where the education system, it's in '70s, I think they started doing a lot of cuts to the arts and music program. And the next few decades focused a lot on the booming tech, the IT industry. So a lot of the money was going into computer labs and so forth. And you can definitely see, like, I see the effects of that when that generation aged. There are certain things that are brought about by music and art, sort of like a connection to something a bit more magical that seemed to be missing overall in the culture at that point. There's been so many linkages. When I worked as a social worker, I participated in a lot of art therapy courses, drama therapy. So there is a strong link between therapeutic value and creativity. So I think going forth, finding a better way to frame that for the education system, to implement it as well as implementing some more value-based aspects, confidence building, tolerance for difference, like some of the intangibles that have been missing from the education system.
Right. That's a very interesting answer. That the arts and encouraging people to tolerate difference. I think that's definitely something we miss a lot in our culture here, even in America, and you're in Canada. So it's something that's lacking. It's a tolerance for other opinions, a thought process of different nature than you're accustomed to, and so people get kind of tribal. And I think we're getting a lot of that now, and I think the arts can bridge that. So that suggestion is interesting that you would bring that up. And speaking of the arts, of course, would you like to share some poetry with us?
Sure. And sorry, just to add to that also.
Okay.
In regards to counseling, one of the more effective things I found in arts and therapeutic arts is you limit the whole power balance in the same way. So you're not sitting across and you're not verbalizing, you're working it out through a medium that's almost like a third party. So that creates a comfort level you don't always get with clients you're working with as well. So,
interesting.
Yeah. So I just picked a few things here. They're fairly short, just to give an idea of the type of poetry I write. And I'm also not used to reading it out loud, so
okay, yeah. So this is like
too.
an early, maybe you'll start attending some open mics or something.
Yeah. There you go.
We'll see what happens. That'll be great.
Exactly.
Work out there more.
These are untitled, and they're just thrown up here. Dear waves disturb my feet, or is it I that dirty sky to the sea by simply being, loudly but with integrity, like the rose that smells like feet? That's one.
Oh, wow. Like that.
Camera pans over a waking sea like the eager spectator, unknown to wildlife nesting below, lone sparks curiosity, while scans the eye that can't be seen. Yeah. I write in a very dramatic, flamboyant.
Right, but there's a thought process going on there that's, that you're talking kind of like about vision. I know she used a lot of images of the sea and the sky. And
I like mixing the images too, and sort of you could see it from the slant of like Big Brother Eye in the sky too. So
right,
I like
the cosmic eye.
exact cosmic eye too. So
Yeah.
this this one is this one's like a little nostalgic, childish kind of thing. Cap guns pop at sunset. On back porch sparkler fumes, dusting stark sky with smoke and glitter through sweats of summer.
An interesting contrast to the more abstract. That's like very impressionistic, you know, what's going on, observational style. It's also
Yeah.
very jagged in a way that you can fill in the blanks.
Right.
Very
And
interesting.
this is, and some of the ones I write are in relation to mental health and addictions because I worked in it for 15 years. So this is just sort of a relation. Anyway, a sip of water to quench the dream, an empty glass in hand, rusted metal drips its darkness into bottomless sink as dry thoughts thirst for a cleaner drink. And yeah, that's what I have for now. So
Okay, well, those are excellent poems. I mean, I enjoyed.
thank you.
And like I said, you know, I see abstract kind of expressionism and a mixture of that with the impressionistic observations. And there's always a lot in there to fill in the blank and think, well, you know, what is, like you said, what is the sky?
Yeah.
What is the ocean? What are you observing, you know, in the process of you know, what you're painting, the images you're painting and the thoughts behind them. So I appreciate you sharing those. Getting back to the you know, your line, you know, when you were in social work in the arts, you
Yeah.
find that a lot of people who sufferers, I would, you know, roughly speaking, is people have different ways that ailments they suffer from. You know,
Right.
you feel that you know, that the arts factored into their life positively and that it was helpful for them, or did they, some people not interested, or that a lot of people were in your line of work, you know, did you find were very artistic and expressive?
I found you had some people who had a natural propensity to art who wanted to explore it. Then you had others who had no idea and would venture into it and then found out they loved it. I think for some people who are unfamiliar with their own creativity, there is a discomfort because it's like flexing any muscle you haven't worked before. So sort of a lot of the work was sort of dispelling the myths surrounding art and so forth, because there are a lot of preconceived judgments to it, like that art serves no purpose, that it's a waste of time. When you see like throughout history, it's the one thing it's endured. So
Right.
Sometimes people need almost like to be granted permission to be creative and to let go enough to you know, be willing to color outside lines, to perceive shapes how they haven't before. Sometimes the hardest work is just helping people to give themselves the permission to let go a bit.
So some people were not originally, they came in and were like, you know, did they find it therapeutic when they worked with that, or?
Oh yeah, in most situations, very therapeutic. And also I find that in an art and drama therapy groups, they tend to be very supportive of each other's work. So there's like a safety that's created in that as well. I think it's also the opportunity to do something that isn't as direct. So definitely, I've also seen though, in the clients I've seen, a definite correlation between arts and what we perceive as mental health diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
So a definite sort of congruence with those two aspects, and a lot of people who live with quote unquote diagnosis tend to, from my experience, have a connection to the creative and the sensitive.
Right. So it's,
Yeah.
I think that the main thing for me is, in my own experience with mental health, is that when you're suffering from something, you tend to not want that suffering with other people, and you try to, you're more sensitive and prone and empathic towards other people to own their own suffering. And I think maybe there's like a little bit of a disconnect from what was termed the normality or objective reality, and so that leads to a creative process.
Right.
So do you find that people have very different perspectives from your observation, like in terms of, is there a, you know, amongst people who are mental health, you know, have mental health ailments, do they have a very radically different perspective than most of the people that you deal with, other than that and outside of that?
I think that really depends on the individual and what they're experiencing. I found it effective to use diagnoses loosely, but I found it more effective to work directly with people and what their symptoms were, because that's sort of like a global phenomenon, right? Now, obviously, when you're working with things like schizophrenia, there's a certain chemistry where, you know, medication is related, but I find that you can sort through a lot of that by just focusing on symptoms as they appear. And so that's one of the things I had to battle with in working in mental health, was the propensity to diagnose and pigeonhole in boxes, which you could understand why, because you need to find a solution to work with, but also having more flexibility with that. So the people I've worked with who've been struggled with mental health, like I said, I've noticed a lot of I get almost born hardwired sensitivity in these people to the suffering of others, to what others experience. So yeah, that I've seen as universal. I don't know if that answered your question directly. I tend to veer a little bit. Yeah,
that's a very good answer, and it's good to explore, because I think, you know, maybe it is that people are suffering from, when they're suffering from what we call mental health problems, and that the creative process is engaged with that. Maybe it is that they're just more prone to understanding suffering in general. Mm-hmm. They feel it so in depth. There's just so much coming in that they're brought to a sort of different understanding, and it's hard to cope with all these different factors of life. I mean, there's so much suffering in life. You can't deny that. And I think the people that have mental health struggles is maybe one of the problems is, though, as we perceive it, is that they have different capacities for empathy, and they're bringing in all of this different, I guess you could term it light, you know, perception wise, that's making them kind of hour before life in a way, you know, like, I just can't take it anymore. There's just too much going on. I don't know if you've noticed that, or if that's just my own observation or my own feelings for that kind of struggle. But that sounds like, you know, the sensitivity and the creative process. I mean, those are things that go hand in hand with exceptionally creative people, and I think that's very much the case. So, studying, you know, ancient civilizations, and what drew you to that anyway? That's interesting. That in esoteric teachings, I mean, I can imagine there'd be a linkage between the two in some ways. Do you have any thoughts on that?
During my writing in meditative states, I started feeling this connection to Egypt. So I was just drawn to explore Egypt. And upon exploring the pyramids and I guess certain documentaries about sort of strange energy and healing properties that occurred within the pyramids, it got me looking into some more, I guess, magic related wisdom teachings. And it started like a breadcrumb trail that led to some of, you know, the ancient civilization, Atlantis, Lemuria, and also to exploring, I guess the cosmos a little bit more as well. So it was like a breadcrumb trail that led around to different things, and wound up in energetic sound healing, like discovering different sound frequencies and how they can be worked as medicine for the body, as well as different colors and so forth.
Interesting. So, and looking into the you know, the, as you call it, the breadcrumb trail.
Yeah.
What are some observations? I mean, just general observations about human nature you might have, and your own thought process about that.
In human nature, I think we're experiencing a lot of guilt overall, and a lot of shame that's internalized. And I think we're in a position. I think we're in a position right now where too many people are worried about getting their opinion out, as opposed to getting out what their helpful action can be. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for debate on matters, but I just find a lot of people are getting caught up in details when they're missing bigger areas where they could be of service to others and helping themselves out.
So there's sort of, I think you're true. I mean, what you're referring to is what Christianity calls original sin, or a lot of other cultures definitely have this sense of guilt. I don't know. I mean, what do you think that comes from? I find, I'm prone to thinking in the same way, that there's a sense of, almost a sense of estrangement from the world as we know it and the human nature. And do you ever write about this? And do you explore that in your writing?
Well, my spiritual beliefs are that we're all divine, and we all inhabit a bit of what people would consider the God spark, divinity, and so forth. So I think where the big split or issue was when we made God an external entity that people then had to link to outside of themselves, that took them out of their own external framework. And I think now, in where humanity is going, we're rediscovering that we have to return inward to find our own God, then to project out at the world. So I think part of it is the disconnect between the individual and God contributed to creating I'm not enough, eventually I'll be saved, eventually I'll have where I need to be, as opposed to, wow, I possess that now, I can develop that now and carry that forth.
Right. Very interesting. And that's like a sense of, like you go back to the esoteric teachings. And you talked about alchemy, and are there any other teachings that you find fascinating, like that theme wise, that appear in your mind, that come to you when you're thinking on these things? Like, do you have certain kinds of fixations or in those lines?
Color has always been a big thing for me. And when I started writing and going to those meditative states, one of the things I noticed happening was I became more sensitive to color and sound. I started perceiving greens and more like brighter, vibrant tones and music as well. So that was a big thing for me, was just for fun. Somebody mentioned Himalayan bowls, and I looked it up online, put my headphones on, and I felt the vibration course through to my body and create change. And at that point, I started exploring, things like Schumann resonance and different frequencies of healing. And I don't claim to be an expert in any of it. I dabble in these different areas, and I have a very casual, non-academic approach to how I go about it. So I'm certainly not an expert. I'm just claiming that these are things I've tapped into that have helped me in healing and helped me bring some of these ideas forth to other people.
Right. Of course. I mean, we're, just having an informal discussion. So it's not just your thoughts on the subject.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what is your experience with green? Now, that's interesting that you, I have a poem called The Greenest Dream, and I explored, a little bit about green, and I thought that was interesting. You mentioned seeing green and hearing vibration.
What I can actually share with you is one of my practice that incorporates green, just to give you sort of an idea of what I'm referring to. And I know this isn't a common thing, but it's based on the teachings of Saint Germain and the purple flame. The violet flame is the transmuting flame used in alchemy. So essentially you enter a meditative state and you visualize what you wish in that particular color. And at that point, if you get strong enough in visualizing, it becomes pretty realistic in your mind. And that's when you can implement sort of different colors into the flame. One of them being green. Green is often associated with healing, also linked to Archangel Raphael and healing as well. That's one of the things I discovered as well. Whether you go colors, archangels, frequencies, they're all these tones that sort of offer the same thing, which makes me wonder if it's all different language for the same thing.
Right. So maybe there's like a unity to perception, but it's sort of hierarchical in a way. Like you have these archetypes, or you can use colors or frequencies or whatever else, intonations, and they all are just like these different images sectioned out. And your mind is still attuned to the same divinity. Very interesting. I'm thinking in the same process sometimes is that as we talked about writing and how it's like a communication with oneself and the divine in a way. Do you feel like sometimes writers are a little more attuned to, I've heard some people say future events, like there's maybe like an incoming avalanche and they kind of have a sensation of it ahead of the rest of the populace. Do you think that's possible, or do you have any thoughts on that?
I think anybody who reaches a meditative state and tunes into that place, which I'm referring to, the ether, divine source, whatever, will be more likely to receive intuitive messages, futuristic messages as well. I think the writing contributes to it, and a lot of writers enter what would be a meditative state when they're doing it for lengthy periods of time. But I think it's more to do with the state. But definitely, writers are more prone to entering that than the average person would sitting doing a particular job.
Or being distracted by something
Yeah.
outside of them.
Yeah.
So I have two general questions, and I think that will separate. Where do you see yourself in about 3 to 5 years as an artist?
And this is this is a tough answer because it sounds like a non-answer, but part of my philosophy right now is I believe we're in the midst of a fairly large transition, and I'm not really planning my art beyond that. So for me, it's more a matter of waking up, tuning into what the day offers and what I want to create that day. It's not that I have an aversion to that type of thinking, but for my own life right now, that seems to work
Right.
better. So I guess where I want to be in 3 to 5 years is continuing to follow my daily intuition, hopefully in a moment-to-moment basis that links to somewhere that serves, I guess, myself and people better.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you find people that are receptive to this, your line of thinking, your meditative states, and or is it hard to find people that relate to that?
People who know me, they still think the ideas are kind of strange, but I live in sort of like a fairly an over a million population city, and I live in an area that's very, very Western thinking. So a lot of these ideas don't go very far with people, which is why I don't share them very often.
Right.
Because I figure if you're going to bring this stuff out, you have to bring it up in a way where people are going to be receptive to it. Otherwise, it becomes more the reason to push somebody saying what I'm saying away.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have about 5 minutes left. So what I wanted to ask you earlier is, do you think, you mentioned this big crisis coming on and this big transition state?
Yeah.
And one of my questions, and this is one of my sort of obsessions,
Yeah.
do you feel like in this current age that people are becoming increasingly narcissistic?
I think what's happening is a lot of what's been running underneath the surface of humankind for decades has come to the surface. And I think it's going to be ugly for a short period, especially when you see like certain celebrities being brought to justice for acts in Hollywood, which you wouldn't see 20, 30 years ago. There's definitely, you see certain people falling in that. I'm optimistic about the future. That's just my own leaning, and that's how I go forth. Do I think there's pockets of ugliness? Definitely. I think there's refuge outside of that ugliness if people are willing to search for it and connect with each other well enough. I think it can be endured. That's my views regarding it.
So it's sort of a matter of perception, like you might say. The general population is facing a reckoning. We're all kind of going through this crisis of both consciousness and a sort of physical thing with the COVID and some of the economic problems we're facing now due to COVID and other things. So we're kind of in this midst of this big transition. And so you're saying, it's a matter of perception really for you, that you can see a positive future and you can see that there are good people willing to be positive influences, a sort of community of sorts. So that's what I gather from what you're saying, and I hope I represented that correctly.
Yeah, a lot of my news sources don't run in the mainstream media.
Right.
So I'm getting a different viewpoint. But from what I'm understanding is there's a lot of grassroots work right now, excellent community building work that's being done across the US, across Canada right now, that's not making the headlines. You also have a lot of kids right now. Our generation apparently is 3 IQs higher than previous generations. You have younger kids that are starting up these green and ethical startup businesses. It's a really strange climate, but there's a lot of good going on that doesn't get publicized. So,
Right.
of course, it takes a long time for that to trickle up to where, you know, the big faces on the screen are.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a lot of good ripples of change. A lot of people going back to casual, door to door. Hey, this is what I offer. Do you want vegetables? Do you want this? Do you want that?
Right.
So I think there is some of that occurring, and I'm not saying any of that to dismiss the stress of what's going on, but just to make sure that we at least challenge whether or not we're getting an accurate framework of what's actually going on and what we're stepping into.
Right. So my final word, final say, we in the last minute or so before closing, if there's anything you would like to say to your fellow creative writers, creative people in pursuit of creative writing and creative endeavors, and you may, if you want to give a couple of shout outs to, you know, friends, family, whoever's supporting you in terms of art, publishers, whatever, feel free. So I'll give you that time to do that.
Okay, I guess any advice I would have, and I prefer not to give. It'd be just sort of do what you love, stick with it, and also don't determine the value of what you're doing based on superficial things like likes and how many people you're reaching.
Right.
Because essentially your inner heart and intuition will tell you if what you're creating is of value. And I don't feel like anything else should necessarily sway that if you're tuned into that. So just continue to be flexible, be open to feedback, and I don't know, just in general, just do what you love.
Excellent. That's excellent advice. So it's got about a minute left, so I'm gonna close the show. And thank you for joining us today, Anthony.
Oh, can I do a thank you? I forgot thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Alien Buddha Press. They put out my first book, and I would like to also thank family and friends who've been supportive. Other writers, not by name in particular, but there's a lot of great people willing to share hidden wisdoms out there if you're willing to ask the questions. And just thank you to the reception I've received from them, and good luck to everybody going forward.
Thank you. This has been the New York Parrot Literary Corner with Anthony Gorman today, and I'm Dustin Pickering. Please donate if you would like. Keep us going. They PayPal me at New York NY Parrot, and the subscribe